What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Student Built Startups podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Stone, entrepreneur and marketing analytics student at the University of Minnesota Duluth. I interview student entrepreneurs to share their stories and business strategies. Today's guest will speak about education, youth empowerment, and personal development. She's the author of Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, and I highly encourage you to go check out her website, www.deboraholatunji.com. Now, I'm super excited to introduce you all to the founder of the Student Leadership Initiative Program, Deborah Olatunji. Hey, Deborah, I am super happy to have you here on the Student Built Startups podcast. I'm really excited to talk with you. I'll have you start off by saying hello to everyone listening and sharing one crazy but true fact about yourself.
Okay. Well, first, hello, Cameron. Thank you so much for having me as a guest. I'm very excited for this conversation today. One crazy fact about me is, I think this happened last summer. I'm not usually one who's incredibly daring, but two of my friends and I were both interested in photography, well, all three of us. And so last summer we did a photography session in the street. It was so crazy because we were running back and forth trying to, beat traffic and whatnot. And it was at night. And so it was a really, really crazy memory that I haven't even told my mom. So
Oh my gosh, like a real life game of Frogger.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool story. It was probably a big adrenaline rush.
Oh yeah.
That's cool. So I know you have a really cool story and a lot of great stuff to share. So if you want to start off with talking about a little about your education and then some details about your Student Leadership Initiative program that you have founded and your book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius.
Yes. So at the center of all the things that you just mentioned, my book and the organization that I started, I have a core value. And so my core value is in being an igniter. And this just means that I see myself as an unstoppable creator who works together to bring communities together, to listen to them really carefully, and then empower them so we can collaborate and build something better than what we currently have or dismantle a system that isn't working. In my case, it's education. And so in my book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, High School Redesigned, I talk all about the ways education needs to serve the 21st century learners a lot better and show them the ways to do so. And so I'm a very action-oriented person, and I never want to say, let's fix this problem without having a solution of my own. And so through this book, I sought to find many different solutions, not just from my perspectives in education, but from many different ones, from senators to teachers to parents to college students to high school students to entrepreneurs and even climate activists. And so I really talk to people from all across the spectrum about what they think we should do in order to make an education system that not only helps kids become more entrepreneurial, but also helps them become more confident in the things that they're pursuing and the kind of change that they want to pursue in their communities. And then with my organization, the Student Leadership Initiative Program, it is a social venture that is student-led, mentorship-fueled, and community-focused. And the whole goal is just for high school students, specifically underclassmen, to feel welcome in an environment to share their ideas, to have a safe space to talk about different difficulties that they may be going through, and then also to have a peer mentor who guides them along that process. And so currently we have a founding chapter in Delaware, we have a chapter in Tennessee, and the goal is to become nationwide by 2023.
That is awesome. I really like how you have that core value of being an igniter. I think that's just awesome that you identified that about yourself and you just 100% know who you are, what you want to do, and how you're going to go about it. So I think that's awesome. And I really like how you described your Student Leadership Initiative program, because I think having a mentor and feeling a sense of community and being welcomed is really important to your success in any area, regardless of where you're going into. So I think that's kind of a great thing that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing that grow. So what kind of led you down the path of this entrepreneurial type journey and helping people get the most out of their education?
So I experienced it myself when I was a freshman. My older sister and I, who's 2 years older than me and is an incredible inspiration for all the things that I pursued and the different passions that I've had, but we both went to this conference called the Diamond Challenge. And essentially the Diamond Challenge is an international competition that is based at our local university, at the University of Delaware, and students from all over the world come to compete at this entrepreneurial competition. And that was where I really got the sense of what entrepreneurship was. I didn't have a full definition because it wasn't a technical project. I wasn't doing anything on my own. I wasn't, taking real action steps to discover the meaning, but this was just a real introduction for me. And so in that environment, I met so many incredible students, like I said, from all around the world who were so incredibly passionate about solving a specific problem. And that's what really stood out to me. And so when I ended up going through my entrepreneurial journey, I always came back to that idea, that concept of if you want to solve something, you have to be specific about it. And so specifically for me, I wanted to solve the problem and how experiential learning isn't a big focus in the education system. And I wanted to talk to people who had an experiential learning experience to see how it really changed their view of, how they were going to pursue something and what they wanted to take, what steps they wanted to take for the future. That, and I also did a learning challenge in 2017 with a program called Grip Tape. And so Grip Tape is a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on giving youth from ages 15 to 19 $500 grants to learn whatever they want. And so I did this when I was 15 years old, and I ended up becoming a part of the board in the summer of 2018. And from that process, I've been able to not just experience the benefits of my own learning journey, but to see other students get so excited about what they care about and design those paths of learning in entirely their own way. And it's just so exciting to see them just get ignited by the fact that they can pursue something on their own and then use those ideas and those skills and those concepts that they discovered themselves to empower and encourage their friends. And so it just continues to be this large domino effect of almost like a big game of tag. You're trying to tag someone to get that passion and kind of be the light for them so that they can discover how entrepreneurial and experiential learning can change their world.
Yeah, you said a lot of awesome things there. Starting with like, we'll just start at the end there. And you said like empowering people, like students, to follow kind of their passions and having that ability to go and pursue something on their own. I think that is like really important. And how you kind of said like it's a game of tag kind of, because I think really if you try to focus on just impacting one other person, that's going to have a more like of a compounding effect than most people realize, because that one person is going to go on and impact someone else. So kind of that game of tag is an interesting way to kind of describe that phenomenon. So I really like that. And I think that's awesome that you've just been involved in all these different things that have been working on bringing like a sense of empowerment to entrepreneurs and students. So yeah.
For sure. I think it's really empowering to see people get excited about what they care about, like I said, and they never forget the learning challenge. And so that's definitely a really beautiful part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. So if there was one thing that you think would have benefited you if you would have known that in the beginning of your journey, what do you think that one thing would have been?
The importance of being flexible. I think that as entrepreneurs, we're very stubborn and we kind of want everything to go one way. And so when I started the Student Leadership Initiative program, I had 5 people with me, my twin sister actually, and then actually it was 4 people. My twin sister, a friend who was in the same grade as us, a junior, and then a sophomore. And then 3 months into the launch, we hadn't even really gotten our feet wet just yet, because we had an activity fair, we had to get student interest, we had to get the students to apply to show that real initiative that they wanted to be a part of something that you had to put some real effort behind before getting into. And so 3 months into the program, 2 of those people, not my twin sister, they decided that they were going to take a hiatus, and that meant that they just weren't going to come back. But they didn't want to say it. They're just like, we're going to take a hiatus. Don't worry, we'll be back. But they weren't. And so a month after they did that, well, before then, I was just absolutely devastated. I will never forget the moment when I was pacing around in my living room, and I was just like, we just started this project and 2 people have already left. And so I think that's a natural process of being an entrepreneur. You'll have those fallout moments, and it's important to be flexible to understand, that even when people decide that they have to take a step back, maybe that's a blessing that you may not have realized. And so a month after that, we found 3 people to replace them, and they were in our grade. And that's how we really came up with the system and how leadership would be just displayed in the Student Leadership Initiative program. And so in the following year, this past school year, we had a senior advisory board where the seniors were kind of like mentors for the junior leaders, and the junior leaders were the ones who were doing the real peer mentorship and getting the guidance from above. And so what I thought was a really big, difficult change ended up becoming the system in which we run, not just in Delaware, but in Tennessee too, because it sets up a system of accountability, not just for the juniors who are doing this new leadership position for the very first time, but also for the seniors, because, we may be overburdened with college and different interests that we're pursuing and trying to get the best out of this last year, but you still have that contribution that you can give to a junior that, like we said, was a domino effect of affecting the kids that they're mentoring as well. And then the other hiccup that I had was when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor. And I think it's just one of those societal, and probably cultural too, values that tell you that there are only certain careers that you should go into, like a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. And so I was so focused on becoming a doctor that I kind of closed off other interests. Like I really like debating. I really enjoyed doing a mock trial session in the 8th grade, but I kind of pushed it aside and I said to myself, I want to be a doctor. So that stuff isn't really important. But then I really started getting into education policy. And that was when I realized that I don't just want to go into healthcare. I want to use the passion that I have for serving others and showing them how to, be ignited about their passions to also make real policy movements. And so that's when I realized that my healthcare interest and legislative interest don't have to be, these linear lines that never, sorry, these parallel lines that never meet each other, but they can rather converge and, become something that I create for myself. And even though it sounds scary and really daunting, it's so much better to pursue something that you're uncertain of than pursuing something that you're certain of because of some security and not pursuing, that other thing that could bring you a lot of real joy. And so right now I'm in the process of majoring in nursing and minoring in public policy. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm really excited to put those two passions together and see where it leads.
Yeah, I really like what you said about like society kind of puts this pressure on us to feel like there's only one path, and that one path is like you can't stray from it because like it's unknown. But I feel like one thing that needs to become more of like a norm in society is young people going and experiencing new things and getting a taste for as many things as they can, so then they can truly find what they are passionate about and what they want to do. Because really, when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, you don't really know what you want to do until you get out there and try a bunch of different things. So I think
For
that's
sure.
that's one, and that's probably one thing about experiential learning that is so
Mhm.
valuable, because you get to have that actual experience and get an idea of if that's something that you are really passionate about or like to do or not. And then also when you said when you like take a step back and like you kind of have a hiccup, how that can be like a positive thing. And I think those are the things that really make you like tougher and like learn how to deal with those things that come up, because they're probably going to happen again in the future. And once you deal
Mhm.
with them once, dealing with them a second time, you're going to know how to go about it, how to do it, and you're going to have a better understanding of just dealing with those tough situations. So those were definitely some great things that you shared there. Um, and I know you have this perspective of like failures being like a very like beneficial thing in a sense, rather than being negative. And I was just kind of curious how you came to like having that mindset and kind of why you view failures in such a positive way.
Yeah, so it's good to preface that I haven't always been this way. I'm glad
Mm-hmm.
that you said that I came around to that understanding because, I'm human. When I first encountered failure, I wasn't jumping up for joy. I wasn't
Yeah.
ecstatic about it. And so I think my first kind of reframing of it was when I was a sophomore, and I actually wrote about this in my college essay. And my biology teacher, he wasn't the best biology teacher. I think he was 3 years into his teaching profession, and so he decided that he was going to give us pop quizzes every other day to measure whether or not we were learning. And you could tell just by that face that you just made that the students were outraged because, I mean, how can a pop quiz show you what I'm learning
Mm-hmm.
every single day and you're not giving us? He wasn't being flexible. He was just saying, this is how we're going to do it. This is the only way we're going to do it. And if you don't like it, well, I don't care. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to take bio. And so I was really outraged by that. And it wasn't the first failure that I ever had that woke me up to this, but I failed this one biology quiz. I'm pretty sure I got a 63, and I was just sitting with it. And I said to myself, what does this even mean? Like, what does this failure represent? And how does it, affect the rest of my high school experience? Because I know there's one grade, but like there are multiple successive failures that have happened before and are probably going to happen again. So how do these failures affect me and my journey and my experience? And so from that failure, I ended up asking myself the question, what does education mean to me? And I realized that it wasn't testing quizzes. It wasn't these pop quizzes. It wasn't these unnecessary routine activities that told me that this was how I learned or told me what kind of learner I was. And when I thought of that definition, it just felt so liberating. And it's almost like the pressure was taken off of me because I went to a STEM-based high school where everyone was extremely competitive. Everyone wanted to be the valedictorian. That's what it's called. Yeah, the valedictorian. And in that moment, I realized that none of those things mattered to me. And in my ideal education experience, I wanted to be really immersed in what I was studying and being able to have deep conversations that went beyond the surface level of what topics we were interested in. And so when I had that kind of mindset set shift, I realized that these failures weren't just failures, they were opportunities to build something out of yourself. And so in my keynote, I actually talk about this. on turning failure into fortitude. It's not something that's incredibly easy, but there are steps that you can take in order to do so. And the first step is identifying the failure and understanding what it means to you. And then some people may see failures as rejections almost. And so I thought, why don't we see these rejections as redirections instead? Because all of the failures that I've had in my life, if I hadn't had them, I wouldn't have started this organization. I wouldn't have written my book, and I wouldn't have been on this episode, talking with you. And so I started to see these failures and rejections almost as gifts, these humbling presents to remind me that I don't know that everything is certain, and my interests can change, my passions can change, the different direction that I want to take can change, and that's okay. And so I just had to tell myself, despite the fact of what society was telling me about failure, that it was equating to nothing and meaninglessness, and that it was a feeling rather than something that you could change, that I could turn these failures into something tangible lessons that I could use not only for myself, but for people around me.
That was like a very, very good rant that you had there. um, I One thing that I just completely resonated with me that you said was how like you were going and saying how your professor teacher like said like no, like this is how I'm doing it. I don't care what you think. Like that whole perspective is like there's so much wrong with it because essentially like professors, teachers, they're leaders in a sense, and they're leading their students through education. And I think that leaders need to have the mindset that they're like working for the people that they're leading and not the people they're leading are working for them, because they're supposed to be guiding them and like helping them get to wherever they are trying to get to. And I think just embracing the fact that as a leader, you should take feedback and do as much as you can. I know there's only so much you can do for however many people are in a class or that you're teaching, but I think having one way that's like set and you're like dead set on it and not taking any like feedback or really showing much like caring is not the right way to go about it. So I really, really liked what you said about just that. And that's kind of my thoughts on that whole situation. But I think the way you kind of described that failure and you reframed your mindset, I feel like that's one of the most important things you can do in like education is reframing that mindset, because as you said, like what is education? If it's not a like a grade, it's not a letter grade, it's you learning, like, and however you want to define your success as being a learner, like your grade on a paper doesn't necessarily matter because most of the time it's a subjective grade. And as long as you're actually learning, maybe that's what really matters, I think.
For sure.
Yeah. So how do you think we as like humans, students, and just people in general should react to situations that are like beyond our control as learners in this life that we're living?
I think it's important first to identify where you do have control, so you can, because I know that it can feel less empowering if you don't know what's going on or if you don't have control of something. So I would start by identifying the things that you can control, like your attitude, your mindset, the approach that you take towards it, and then start working towards the things that you can control. Maybe that's the curriculum, maybe that's the teacher. You can't choose who's in front of you. I mean, not yet, but you can talk to administrators if you'd like, or have conversations with your friends about how to, supplement the experience. But ultimately, in not just education, but in every experience, it's a matter of identifying what steps you want to take forward despite the circumstances around you. And then what resources do you have, or what resources can you get from your connections, from people to help you move forward in a direction that really just empowers you and takes you away from that helplessness feeling of not knowing what to do.
Yeah. I really kind of one thing that I saw in that there was like a perspective shift, because a lot of people focus their perspective on like what they can't control, what they like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. But when you, like you said, identify what you can control, what you can do, then you're able to actually start taking action because you know where you can take action. And that's pretty much all you can do. So focus on what you can do and take action there. And that's like that's the way to do it, essentially. So I like that. So we can talk a little bit now about what your book covers and some topics related to that. I'm pretty excited about this because I looked into your book a little bit, and I'm considering I'm gonna buy it. I'm telling you that. I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna read it, and
Okay.
I will probably share it with a lot of people. But I want to make sure that I read it first, and I'm sure it's a great book. But I'm pretty excited to get my hands on it. So how do you define student success, and how can we as like a society as a whole start to redefine that idea of student success?
So, my personal definition of student success is where I am in a learning environment where my learning isn't focused on one, subjective measure like a grade, because that only measures how I felt about the subject during that time of day, and then whether or not I got enough sleep, whether or not I ate breakfast, all that stuff. And then it's also how action oriented I am towards the subject. And so I've discovered that experiential learning is the true way for me. And fortunately, nursing is all about being hands on, same thing with public policy. And so my personal definition of student success is being in an environment where I can tap into those two different areas of having an experience and having a discussion and then using them to complement my learning. Now, if you ask someone else, someone my age or even my twin sister, they may have an entirely different definition of student success. And so in an ideal education system where we truly appreciate the different perspectives, interests, and ideas that students have, I can't give you the sole definition for student success because it's different for every single person. And so as a society, I think that is at the core of what we need to do in order to redefine and redesign the education system. We have to start asking actual students, what are you interested in? What are the passions you have? Instead of focusing on the question of what do you want to do when you get out of here? What do you want to do when you grow up? What are the things that inspire you now? What drives you in the morning? What wakes you up? What if you could do one thing, maybe not just one thing, maybe if you could do three things, with your entire day, every single day, what would those three things be? And they can change the next day. You may say you want to do entrepreneurship, photography, and silk making. I don't know. And then the next day you're doing basket weaving and, pottery and journaling. It doesn't matter. But the whole idea is that we need to be so much more comfortable with letting kids embrace their interests and ideas and then having that flexible mindset to it as well.
I completely agree with you there. I think so many people go out into the world and get a job that they are not like interested in or passionate about because it's safe and has a good salary, and they just want to do that because that's kind of what everybody's been telling them. But like you said, I think it's important that they explore their passions and interests, especially while they're young. So if there were a few like vital skills that you would say that students need to learn but they aren't learning in school, what would those skills be? What would
Certainly.
what would those skills be? Sorry.
um, you're good. I would say first and foremost, definitely public speaking. I think one of the biggest things that we've realized in SLIP when we're talking about leadership and public speaking is that the only experience that students really have is maybe presenting in front of the class for a Spanish project, or having to do a group project where you have to stand together awkwardly and pretend like you all put in the same amount of work, something like that. And so I think that public speaking is a skill that is very much not taught at all in our schools. And we focus a lot on writing, but not on storytelling. And so I think the problem with kind of the mechanism in which we teach these things is we're not showing students, you can have ownership over this. You can decide how you want to tell your story. Instead, we're telling them this is the template for success. This is the template to do things. And if you don't follow it, well, you're not going to be successful. And that's not true. And so I think one of the biggest things that I wish I had from my high school experience, and I was lucky to have pursued things outside of my high school and try to supplement my learning, like I said, through poetry competitions, entrepreneurship competitions, and then also speech and debate. But I think public speaking and then the ability to tell a story well and tell a story in a way that captivates an audience beyond any kind of academic writing, I think those are two incredibly big skills that just those two could help change a student's entire mindset and how they see themselves and how their community sees them.
Yeah, that's right on. I agree with you because like in my high school experience, I even took like a public speaking class, and from that class, I learned like the technicalities of public speaking, but I didn't learn like how to tell a story and how I should tell a story based on me and what works best for me. And it was more or less just like the technicalities. And I think if we could start teaching students like actual how to tell a story and how to keep like engagement in like your speeches and whatnot, that would be a very big win for students as they progress through life, because there's one thing that you're going to have to do throughout life, and 90% of jobs is some sort of public speaking and some sort of storytelling. So I think that's a really important thing. So I know you've talked about moonshot thinking in the past, and so how can we use, or well, I guess what exactly is moonshot thinking and how can we use that to help us achieve our most ambitious goals?
So moonshot thinking is a term that the astronaut Astro Teller came up with. And when I was doing research for the book, I stumbled upon a video of him explaining it. And I thought to myself, this is the best explanation for the kind of process we need to take in terms of redesigning education and then seeing our own personal development, purpose, and identity. And so moonshot thinking is all about doing things 10 times more. And so almost like pushing the limits of what you think is possible, something that could be absolutely crazy, but it just shows that you have enough faith to believe that you can do something that big. And so maybe something that's big for someone is writing a book. Because if you told me when I was a freshman that I was going to write a book, I would have been like, about what? Because I wouldn't have had a single clue. But it's the idea of creating these processes for yourself that, there are some small consistent goals that you take in between, some smart goals that you do to reach them, but you set the target very high so that even if you don't reach that target, you still have a momentum. And so you can maybe change your idea, still having that flexibility, like we talked about earlier, to reach something of that nature, but you just have that forward momentum that keeps you going. And so the exact example that he used was, and I'll use my location, for example, I live in Delaware, and so it takes me 40 minutes to drive to Philadelphia. And so he was like, why can't you go to Tokyo in that amount of time? And I was just like, you just can't. And he was like, so moonshot thinking is taking that scenario and saying, well, why can't I go to Tokyo from Delaware in 40 minutes, just like I can in Philadelphia? And it sounds crazy. It sounds just like time travel and whatnot, but maybe one day we will be able to do that. And that won't be such a crazy idea. And so it's kind of depending on that idea, even with trying to go to the moon, that was something that was so crazy. But it was just the consensus that if we can do these things, what can't we do? And so it's switching that mindset again of saying to yourself, why, instead of saying why you can't, talk about why you can. Why can't I should change into why shouldn't I? And so that's kind of the whole point of moonshot thinking. It's supposed to be something that empowers you because it forces you to do something that is really scary, that is a big risk, that makes you feel like you're not in control. But oftentimes in those moments, that's when the most beautiful projects come to life.
Yeah, it is. I really resonate with that. That is awesome. I like that idea of moonshot thinking. And I guess I thought of a quote that I really like. It's like, you should like shoot for the moon because even if you don't make it, you still land amongst the stars. That's like one of my quotes that I thought of about that. But I think that, like you said, like, why can't we do that? And I'm sure someday we will be able to go from Delaware to Tokyo in 40 minutes. I'm sure it'll happen. It's probably just a matter of time. But I like that. And I think that's a very great way to kind of have a positive perspective on setting ambitious goals and making like a big impact, because if you want to have a big impact, you have to have big goals. So I feel like a lot of students in today's world ground their confidence and self-esteem in their grades and their like scores on tests. So why exactly like should we start to change this, and how can students themselves start to make their own guidelines for success?
I think one of the biggest reasons why you can't depend on grades and external factors like your likes on social media, or maybe whether or not you're invited to parties and such, the reason why you shouldn't depend on those things is because they're temporary. You taking the time to build your self-awareness and your personal development and your networking skills, those are things that you can continue to build on forever. But 20 years from now, no one's going to ask you what you got in biology class. No one's going to care. No one's going to ask you about that one photo that you posted on a Saturday, how many likes you got or how many comments you received. And so it's kind of having a forward momentum mindset, in that what are things that I can do that I can continue to build on every single day that will be able to serve me in the future, as opposed to serving me solely in the moment. And so for students, I would say that looks like reevaluating what is important to you and using those to move forward. And so maybe you are really social media obsessed at the moment. How can you use your passion for social media to maybe work for someone, work for a company, be a social media manager? How can you use the different skills that you've picked up in terms of how to get followers, how to get engagement, how to get comments? How can you use that towards an organization that is really interested in entrepreneurship and really fueling passion in other students? And so it's not saying that one interest or another is better than the other, but it's really focusing on how can you create forward momentum out of the things that you're currently passionate about, so that 5 years from now, maybe just 5 months from now, you're continuing to propel that cycle and that circle of interest. And then maybe you'll find another interest, but it's just you're continuing to put your passion and energy into something that is more than just a moment.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what your interests or passions or hobbies are. You're learning skills of some sort that you can apply to a lot of different situations. And just looking for those opportunities is a great way to go about, focusing on how you can turn that towards your long-term self. And I could not imagine if I was like talking to somebody at dinner when I'm like 40 and they're like, yeah, so I graduated high school with like a 3.8 GPA. I'd be like, what?
Like, why do we
Okay.
care?
Okay. Cool. So yeah, I think that's a really that's a really good way to put it. Like no one's going to care what your grades were when you're like out of school. Like I think that's really interesting to think about it that way. Um so is this book that you wrote, is it only for students, high school students, college students, or can anybody benefit from reading it?
I think that if you have gone through the education system, if you care about what the education system will look like for your future kids, which is one of the biggest reasons why I wrote this book, then it's certainly something that you should be interested in. And also, if you want to create action and real mobilization in the education sphere, then I also think that this is a book that you should read. Usually, the types of readers that I've gotten, and they're all across the spectrum, from teachers to parents to students to entrepreneurs to college students, everyone is saying that there's so much value to get from this book because it has so many action steps. At the end of every single chapter, there's at least 3 calls to action. Well, there's summaries and takeaways, and then there's a call to action that you can take in your everyday life. And so a lot of people were telling me, even people who are far removed from education, maybe 20 years above, they said to me, I wish I read this book 10 years earlier, because there's so many different gems about self-awareness, about personal development, about how you can continue to contribute to your community that I never would have learned in high school. And so I wouldn't say that it's solely for students, even though I did write it specifically for students. I wrote it with a student mindset because I don't think there are any books in the education sphere right now that are written by a student to students, because they for some reason don't care about our perspective, even though we are the customers in the business of education,
Uh-huh.
which never made sense to me. But the real focus is trying to listen to students. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a parent, if you want to hear the voices of a generation, then this is definitely a book that I would recommend picking up.
All right. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think like as if you're like planning on being a parent and having kids, I think that like understanding how like you could have gone through the education system like with a better mindset, then you can read this book, understand kind of that mindset, and then when you have kids, you can teach your kids kind of that mindset that they can have and transfer that knowledge. So I think that's another really great reason that an adult of any age would be great to check out the book. So now we can move on to the Fast Five section here. So we'll do 5 questions and we'll just go through them pretty quick. So what is the most valuable learning experience that you have had?
When I was a junior, I took this class at a local university at the University of Delaware called Healthcare Theater. And it was that idea that I was talking about earlier, with combining 2 things that seem very, very different and seeing what can come of it. And so this was before I had realized that I really, really wanted to pursue both public policy and nursing. And so in this healthcare theater class, I became the patient. I had I had strep throat. I even solved like some fake maternity scenes. I had appendicitis where I had to pretend like I had an appendectomy and was sitting in surgery and everything like that. And so it was an extremely fun and immersive class where I got to be in the position of a patient while the other nursing students around me were practicing in their field. They were really trying to get a sense for, their profession beyond the traditional dummies that they used to use. And so they wanted to make the experience as real as possible for these student nurses, so that when they go to the real world, they would have had actual human experiences and emotions that they were interacting with, and knowing how to, troubleshoot a situation or calm a family down, or just make them understand, how best you can serve them and how best you can give that care. And so I had never done theater before. I had done shows. Like I've been singing with my twin sister for quite some time now, ever since I was 2, but I was never in a position where I was speaking like in the theater and like being a central character beyond being in the choir. And so I really, really got into that. And now I want to do some kind of maybe a dance group or a theater group in college, because theater pushes you out of your comfort zone, especially with the improv scenes that we did, because it makes you choose in that moment, what you're going to do. And it's just entirely improv, and you don't have to be perfect about it. I think that's the thing I love about improv. You just have to do something. And so that was something that I took away from the class, that it's important, that forward momentum, like I was talking about again, to be interested in something and then take the steps forward. No matter if you don't know if they're going to be perfect, just take those steps forward, because they're going to lead you somewhere.
That is absolutely just very interesting to me. Like, so that's where all the actors from like House, that's where they come from.
Yeah, they took that class.
Awesome. So if there was one book that you would recommend, what would that one book be?
I would recommend reading Between the World and Me. Um, lessons that I'm pretty sure it's lessons that I would tell my child by Tanase Coates, because it was a really defining book for me about parenting and childhood, and it's taken from the perspective of a Black man in America. And I had never read a book like this before, and I feel like it's so incredibly crucial to this time because it made me understand an entirely new perspective. Because I'm Nigerian American, so I know exactly what my roots are, and I have some Black friends who don't. And so having read this book about so many different experiences that he went through as a Black American in a letter to his son, that was so incredibly powerful to me because it changed the mindset of not just how I interact with others, but how I interact with life in general. And so I'm constantly now seeking to find ways to either dismantle systems that aren't working or redesign the ones that I want to create so that my children aren't telling me about the problems that I had, and so that we're moving forward and not moving backwards. And so I really sat with that book. I really, really enjoyed it. I think that you should definitely read it. It might make you cry, but those are often the best books, honestly. And so I love the mindset that he had of writing this letter to his son, kind of giving him the guidelines in terms of navigating a world that has so much racial tension. And so that was a book that really changed my mindset, not just about being an advocate for myself, but also being an advocate for my future kids.
Awesome. Sounds like that book had a very big impact on you.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's cool. Um, what is one business tool that you would recommend?
I would definitely recommend using Otter. So Otter is an app that, you can do interviews and it records not just the audio but also the transcript, and that's something that I used a lot during my interviews. And so I would tell someone beforehand, of course, before I was recording, state law, but I really just got to see the transcription of the conversation, and it makes it so much easier to go back through something that you might have missed, or to pick up some different skills that you didn't get to write down, something like that. And also how to transcribe those skills maybe into a LinkedIn post or an Instagram post so that it can help other people. And again, you're always asking for the person's permission before you do
Yeah.
so. But Otter has been so incredibly helpful, not just for me in writing this book, but also when I'm pursuing different projects, asking students what they really care about and what they're interested in, because I can take what they say word for word and use those words towards them. Like, well, you said to me that you can do this, so I'm going to hold you accountable for it and use that to empower them. And, so that's just an incredible tool that I would definitely recommend. It's not sponsored, but otter.ai is such a great app.
Awesome. I haven't heard of that one yet, so I might have to check that one out. It sounds really, really useful.
Yeah.
So how do you go about scheduling your time and planning ahead?
So Google Calendar is my best friend. I use Google Calendar a lot. And I've recently gotten into color coding, like podcasts are green and personal development events are purple. And I just created a system for myself to look forward to days. And so if you have things on your calendar, honestly, that might be just enough to wake you up in the morning, but also trying to set some kind of a routine for yourself, because I will admit I woke up like 2 hours ago. So I wasn't like on track on this Saturday specifically, but also having that kind of grace for yourself. You can create a schedule, you can create a calendar, but understand also that you're human. You're not a robot. You don't always have to go through this schedule, but just setting those kinds of boundaries for yourself, creating days of rest. I even have no screen days that I do on Saturdays or Sundays, and today is not one because I'm talking to you through a screen. But I do these no screen days where I don't use my screens at all, and I just use that to tap back into that original creativity that I have, to get away from the comparison game that is constantly going on social media, and then just also to have some moments of stillness and mindfulness. And so I would definitely recommend doing those things, and then drinking a lot of water. You'd be so surprised how well water works. It's an incredibly great resource that is almost absolutely free. But I would definitely recommend drinking at least 3 bottles of water, because it just helps you going. It helps you keep going, and then it helps you have a clear mind. So
Absolutely. I was a big water drinking preacher as well.
it's great. Like,
yeah, I've done personal training in the past and always at the gym, like, you drinking your water? It looks like you're a little thirsty. um, so what is the number one thing that drives your motivation?
I think the support circle that I have around me has been a really big motivator and driving force. My entire family, for the most part, is incredibly ambitious. My older sister, she really has trailblazed a path for me and my identical twin sister to not see ourselves as the same person, but to see ourselves as individuals who have these different interests, who want to pursue different paths, and, how we can work together to find those resources to do so. And so she's really opportunity oriented, and that even inspired me to start this initiative on my Instagram called Opportunity Wednesday, where I share opportunities that I find all week through like different tags and hashtags, and from people who send them to me to share with my network and to share to my audience, just to demonstrate the fact that you need to audit your circle with people who want to see you grow, who don't want to hold these opportunities from you because they know the power of them, but also just want to pour into your development and be a source of someone you can ask for help. And so I've always seen my sisters as that, and they've been such incredible inspirations for me. And just having those two, not just them, but I have 4 siblings in total. 2 of them have been the most motivational. So I won't tell you which one because they're probably going to listen to this episode and be a little salty. So, but those 2 have been incredibly passionate and inspirational for me. And just having people around me who are also driven, that drives me on days when I don't feel like doing something, or I don't feel like getting up early, or I don't feel like following the schedule. And so I feel like it's so incredibly important to audit your circle, to have people who have a similar mindset, but then also people who are reaching higher. So that just continues to encourage you to reach higher for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, when you surround yourself with people who want to see you succeed and want to see you go to new levels, it's going to be very impactful. And it's good to surround yourself with positive people, because that like sense of positivity or negativity in some cases, it'll spread. It's just kind of how humans work. So I think that's a really powerful statement that you just said. Well, Deborah, I really enjoyed talking with you today. You said a lot of awesome stuff and gave a lot of great insights into education, youth empowerment, and self-development. So I thank you so much. And last thing here, before we wrap up, I will ask you if you could provide one main takeaway for everyone listening. That would be great.
I think that, like we just said in the last question that you asked me, that energy is so incredibly important. And so reframing your mindset comes from the energy that you surround yourself with. A high vibe attracts a high vibe. And so you want to keep those vibes high. That's something that I would really want to end with, because when you have energy that matches your own, it's easier to get back into that process and having the momentum like we talked about throughout the episode, and being able to pursue those moonshot thoughts and, really pursuing things that you think are above yourself. And so just keep a high vibe. I'm not saying that you should be positive all the time, because we're human beings, we're not, but just keep that in mind, that those positive vibes will help you a lot in the long run. And just maintaining an environment where there is energy that is positive to be fed off of, that will help you in the different ecosystems and communities that you end up interacting with. So also take care of yourself. When those moments aren't high, you're going to need to take rest, and be okay with that. You don't always have to be positive all the time. Take those moments to rest and really dwell in your experiences, but have a balance of those two. And if you don't have a balance, work on creating one so that you can have some kind of a direction and motivation to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great main takeaway. And last thing, where can we find more about you and your book?
Yes, so you can find me on my website, www.deborah.olatunji.com. You can find me on Instagram at Deb_Olatunji, on Twitter at Deb_Olatunji, and on LinkedIn.
All right, awesome. And I'll put those links in the show notes so everybody can just go click and get directly there. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest. I really enjoyed this conversation.
All right, and that is it for today's episode, everyone. I'm really glad I was able to share Deborah's story with all of you. Thanks again for being on the podcast, Deborah, and thank you for listening to this episode right now. I really appreciate you supporting the show and following along on this journey that I'm on. And if you want to hear more amazing entrepreneurial stories and advice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review on whatever platform you are listening to this on. I would really appreciate it. And I also encourage you to go check out studentbuiltstartups.com. You can find the links, the show notes, and the high-level topics of everything that we talked about today. Thanks again, and I will catch you on the next episode.